The laughter always came first. The applause followed. Night after night, under the blinding studio lights, Graham Norton appeared effortless, sharp-tongued, charming, in total control of the chaos on his famous red couch. But beneath the practiced smile, there were moments when his body tightened, when his voice softened not with warmth, but restraint. Moments when sitting inches away from fame felt less like celebration and more like endurance. At 62, with decades of television triumph behind him, Graham Norton finally allows the curtain to lift. Not on gossip, but on discomfort. On 6 guests whose presence unsettled him, challenged him, or quietly cut deeper than the audience ever realized. These were not public scandals played out on tabloid pages, but private reckonings buried behind humor and professionalism. What happens when the world expects you to laugh, but inside you are bracing yourself? What does it cost to remain gracious when instinct tells you to pull away? And how many of those moments quietly shape the person you become when the cameras turn off? This is not a story about hatred, but about boundaries, survival, and the emotional toll of always being on. The story does not begin with applause. It begins in the split second before it. The studio lights warm the air, the audience murmurs with expectation, and Graham Norton sits perfectly still, his body angled just enough to invite comfort. His smile appears effortless, but it is carefully constructed, practiced until it feels permanent. Long before the cameras roll, he has already scanned the room, measured its energy, prepared himself to manage whatever might arrive beside him on the red couch. This ease is not natural. It is learned, forged, a form of emotional armor worn so long it has molded itself to his face. Graham understands rooms the way others understand weather, by sensing pressure changes, by reading shifts in tone before a word is spoken. Control, for him, is not dominance. It is safety. If he steers the moment, nothing can turn against him. As the show grows from a clever format into a global phenomenon, the stakes quietly rise. Each episode brings new guests, each carrying invisible weight. Egos sharpened by fame, insecurities hidden behind confidence, power dynamics that hum beneath casual laughter. The audience sees jokes land, glasses clink, stories unfold. They do not see the calculations happening beneath Graham's calm exterior. When a guest interrupts, dismisses, or subtly asserts control, Graham adjusts instantly, softening a remark, redirecting attention, absorbing tension before it can spill. Discomfort is never allowed to linger. It is smoothed over with timing, wrapped in humor, dissolved into laughter. But the body keeps count. Each uneasy exchange leaves behind something small but persistent. A tightening in the chest. A delayed exhale once the cameras stop. Laughter begins to feel like effort rather than joy. The smile still holds, but it no longer feels weightless. In the quiet moments after filming, when the audience has gone and the lights dim, Graham's vigilance does not switch off. Silence settles heavily around him. He replays moments no one else noticed. The tone that shifted, the glance that lingered too long, the subtle challenge that required restraint instead of response. These are not dramatic confrontations. They are quieter invasions, pressing against boundaries he learned to build over a lifetime. Certain guests do more than disrupt the rhythm. They stir something older, a memory of rooms where he was not in control, of having to stay alert, adaptable, agreeable. The smile, once a shield, begins to feel like a burden. Its weight grows with every episode, every expectation that he will always be gracious, always accommodating, always unflappable. This chapter does not name names. It does not accuse. It simply reveals the cost of constant composure. Graham Norton's success is built on mastery of atmosphere, but mastery demands endurance. And as the show continues, as the couch fills again and again with unpredictable presences, a quiet question takes shape beneath the laughter. How long can someone absorb tension before it stops bouncing off the armor and starts reshaping what lies beneath? Before the red couch, before the applause and the practiced ease, there was a quieter landscape where vigilance first took root. Graham Norton did not grow up assuming the world would meet him gently. In his early years in Ireland, Difference was something sensed before it was named, felt before it was understood. Rooms could shift without warning. Silence could carry judgment. And attention, once drawn, could just as easily become dangerous as it was affirming. From a young age, he learned to observe before speaking, to read faces the way others read books. Humor was not simply a talent, it was a defense mechanism. A way to disarm tension before it hardened. A way to stay one step ahead of rejection. Laughter created distance between himself and harm, turning vulnerability into performance. What appeared light was rooted in caution. These instincts followed him into adulthood, evolving rather than disappearing. As Graham stepped into public life, the sensitivity sharpened instead of fading. Fame did not erase old fears. It amplified them. The more visible he became, the more aware he grew of subtle power plays, of dominance disguised as charm, of arrogance masked as confidence. Where others saw celebrity, he felt energy, some warm, some invasive. On the surface, success suggested safety. Inside, the old reflexes remained active. Each guest interaction became a psychological exchange, whether Graham wanted it to be or not. He could sense when someone entered the space expecting control rather than collaboration. He noticed when humor was used to belittle, when stories centered only one voice, when kindness felt performative. None of it was overt enough to confront. All of it was sharp enough to register. This heightened awareness became both his greatest strength and his quiet burden. It allowed him to create an environment where others felt free, relaxed, unguarded. But it required him to stay perpetually alert, absorbing emotional static so the room could feel light. The audience saw a host at ease. They did not see the internal calculations, the emotional adjustments, the restraint required to keep the atmosphere intact. As the show's cultural dominance solidified, so did the imbalance. Graham's role as facilitator left little room for self-protection. Childhood lessons resurfaced in unfamiliar forms. Endure, adapt, keep things pleasant. The red couch became another room where he instinctively managed tension instead of naming it. The chapter closes with an unsettling realization. The same sensitivity that once kept him safe is now exposing him repeatedly to discomfort. Old survival instincts are being triggered by new faces, new power dynamics, new forms of pressure. And as the guest list grows more formidable, the question deepens in the shadows. What happens when the skills that saved you once begin to cost you peace? By the time Graham Norton reaches the height of his career, the red couch has become more than a set piece. It is a stage, a battleground, a confessional disguised as entertainment. The lights are warmer now, brighter, unforgiving. The audience energy swells before the cameras even roll. A low roar of anticipation that fills the studio like electricity. This is where stories are supposed to loosen, where celebrities are meant to relax. But Graham knows better. Proximity does not soften power. It often magnifies it. As guests file in, he feels the shifts immediately. Some arrive open, playful, willing to share the space. Others carry an edge, an expectation to dominate, to steer attention, to test boundaries. Graham's posture adjusts almost imperceptibly. A slight lean forward, a carefully timed interruption masked as humor. His voice remains light, but his mind is fully engaged, tracking tone, pacing, ego. The audience sees laughter. Graham feels friction. There are moments when the room tightens without warning. A dismissive comment aimed at another guest. A joke that lands too close to cruelty. A refusal to play along. In these moments, Graham becomes a quiet mediator. He redirects the energy, shields those beside him, smooths the atmosphere before discomfort can surface. It happens in seconds, practiced and precise. The couch must never feel unsafe. Yet each intervention costs something. The laughter that follows is real, but it is earned through restraint. Graham suppresses instinctual responses, irritation, disbelief, sometimes anger, replacing them with composure. He chooses the room over himself again and again. The audience applauds his brilliance, unaware that they are applauding emotional labor. As the show's reputation grows, so does the caliber of guests, and the complexity of managing them. Fame brings entitlement. Status brings expectation. Some guests arrive assuming the couch will bend to them, that charm alone will excuse dominance. Graham senses it instantly, the subtle attempt to control the space. His smile tightens. His humor sharpens just enough to maintain balance without open confrontation. After filming, when the studio empties and the noise drains away, the tension does not disappear. It settles. Graham sits alone in the quiet, replaying moments that no one else noticed. The glance that lingered too long. The comment that crossed a line but was quickly buried under laughter. His body remembers what his professionalism refuses to acknowledge. Over time, patterns emerge. Certain types of guests leave him unusually drained. Not because they are famous, but because they require him to abandon his own comfort entirely. These encounters linger longer than others, echoing in the silence after the lights go out. The red couch, once a place of controlled chaos, begins to feel like a space where his boundaries are repeatedly tested. This chapter does not erupt into scandal. Tightens instead, slowly, deliberately. Graham begins to recognize a quiet truth he has avoided for years. Endurance is not infinite. The body keeps score even when the face does not show it. And as the laughter fades and the studio doors close once more, a realization takes shape in the dark. Some tensions cannot be joked away forever, and some guests leave marks that applause cannot erase. This chapter settles into a heavier silence. The laughter still exists, but it now feels distant, almost echoing from another room. By this stage in his life and career, Graham Norton has begun to notice a pattern he can no longer ignore. It is not about fame, talent, or reputation. It is about how certain people make the space feel smaller the moment they arrive. These guests do not announce themselves as difficult. They do not storm in or provoke obvious conflict. Instead, they carry something subtler and more corrosive. An entitlement that bends conversation toward them, a cruelty disguised as wit, a refusal to recognize the humanity of others sharing the couch. Graham senses it immediately. His body reacts before his mind can intervene. A tightening of the jaw, a stillness behind the eyes. On camera, nothing breaks. He does what he has always done. He adjusts. He compensates. He fills gaps with humor, redirects attention, protects the rhythm of the show. But internally, something shifts. These encounters feel different. They do not merely demand effort. They drain him. The emotional labor required to contain these personalities is heavier, lonelier. He is no longer simply hosting, he is enduring. What unsettles Graham most is not their behavior alone, but what it awakens in him. Old instincts resurface. The need to placate, the reflex to stay agreeable at any cost. Each interaction becomes a quiet negotiation between professionalism and self-respect. He tells himself it is part of the job. He reminds himself that the audience must never sense discomfort. Still, a line is being crossed repeatedly, invisibly. The studio atmosphere grows tense in ways no one names. A guest interrupts too often. Another dismisses a fellow guest's story. Someone leans into dominance, mistaking confidence for authority. Graham absorbs it all, smiling through moments that leave a faint sting. The cameras capture charm. They do not capture the internal effort it takes not to recoil. Afterwards, alone again, the silence feels heavier than before. These are the episodes he replays in his mind, not because of what was said, but because of what was suppressed. Anger unexpressed, boundaries ignored. He begins to feel a quiet resentment. Not loud, not dramatic, but persistent. It is directed less at the guests and more at himself, for allowing the pattern to continue. This is the emotional breaking point of the story. Graham realizes that being gracious has slowly eclipsed being honest. The role he mastered has started to demand erasure. These guests become symbols of something larger. The cost of prioritizing harmony over self-protection. The couch no longer feels neutral. It feels like a place where he repeatedly chooses silence over truth. And yet, he still does not confront them. Not publicly, not directly. The restraint remains. But internally, a decision is forming. The discomfort is no longer something he can dismiss as fleeting. It has weight now, Meaning, the chapter closes on a moment of clarity that is both calm and devastating. Graham understands that professionalism has limits, and he has been crossing his own for too long. The realization does not bring relief, it brings responsibility. Because once you recognize a boundary has been violated, you can no longer pretend you did not feel it. And as the studio lights fade once more, the question hangs unresolved in the dark. What happens next when endurance gives way to self-respect? Time alters the weight of things. What once felt urgent begins to soften, not through forgetting, but through understanding. At 62, Graham Norton no longer measures his life by ratings or applause. The red couch still exists, the laughter still rises, but something inside him has shifted. Distance has brought clarity. Experience has stripped illusion away. This chapter unfolds in quieter spaces. Empty studios after taping. Dressing rooms lit by a single bulb. Long pauses where reflection replaces reaction. Graham looks back not with bitterness, but with precision. He can now name what he once only endured. Certain guests unsettled him not because they were difficult, but because they violated an unspoken contract of mutual respect. The discomfort was real, the impact lasting, and acknowledging that truth no longer feels like failure, feels like honesty. He understands now that boundaries are not acts of hostility. They are acts of self-preservation. The younger version of himself believed harmony required self-erasure. The older version recognizes that peace demands discernment. He no longer feels compelled to absorb every tension, to neutralize every ego. Some energies do not deserve accommodation. Some presences do not require explanation. The legacy he reflects on is not defined by the names who sat beside him, but by the space he created and the cost at which it came. Graham sees the full arc clearly now. The sensitivity born in childhood, the armor forged through humor, the endurance mistaken for strength. Each phase served a purpose. Each left a mark. What remains is a sense of calm earned slowly, deliberately. The guests he couldn't stand no longer occupy his thoughts. They have become reference points rather than wounds. Evidence of growth. Proof that self-awareness arrived not too late, but exactly when it was needed. The final moments linger on stillness rather than spectacle. Graham sits comfortably in silence. No audience demanding charm. No expectation to perform. The smile, when it appears, is unforced. Lighter. Truer. The story closes not with confrontation or confession, but with acceptance. A man who spent a lifetime managing rooms has finally learned to protect his own. And as the echoes of laughter fade into memory, one quiet truth remains. Sometimes the greatest revelation is not who you endured, but who you finally chose to be for yourself.